Okay, now I want to read from this book, The Semi-Official Letters of British Envoy Sir Ernest Satow from Japan and China, 1895 to 1906. So covering the two periods of duty, first one in Japan from 1895 to 1900, and the second one in China from 1900 to 1906. And this is the Amazon version. I've also got an earlier version, which I did on lulu.com. So, you know, I think that's still available. They're both paperbacks, and there is a Kindle on Amazon as well. And I think you can also probably get a PDF from the Kyushu Institute of Technology academic repository called Kee-tah-kew-shoo. I'll try and remember to put the details in the notes to go with this video. Anyway, off we go. Let's read from the Amazon version. Okay, so the Semi-Official Letters of British Envoy Sir Ernest Satow from Japan and China, 1895 to 1906, edited by myself with an introduction by Dr. Jim Hoare. In terms of Satow Papers references, it starts at PRO 30/33/14/8, and Japan goes as far as 14/11, and then China takes over in PRO 30/33/14/11 and goes on as far as PRO 30/33/14/17. At any rate, those are the PRO references, references if you wanted to look it all up in Kew at the National Archives. Okay, so here we go with Dr. Jim Hoare's introduction. Sir Ernest Satow was a meticulous person. Unlike most diplomats, not only did he keep a diary for almost the whole of his adult life, but he also kept a careful record of much of the informal correspondence that he conducted with the Foreign Office and with other parts of the government in London, as well as many letters to friends and acquaintances. All this material was deposited on loan at the Public Record Office, now the National Archives, and has been freely available to scholars for many years. There are other collections of diplomats' papers, but Satow's have occupied a unique place in the study of those countries with which he was involved. This is particularly true of East Asia, where he began his official career and where he eventually ended it as Minister to China in 1906. But it also applies to his other postings as well. As a result, there is scarcely a book written in English over the last 40 years on East Asia whose author has not used the Satow archive to expand on the official record and to provide Satow's personal insight on the problems and peoples he encountered. This volume, the latest in Ian Ruxton's annotated publications of the Satow archive, which reproduces Satow's record of his outgoing private correspondence to his political masters in London, to the Foreign Office, and to other diplomats, will enable many more scholars to benefit from this important collection. Like all diplomatic heads of mission, Satow recorded his formal actions and gave his considered opinion on issues in weighty dispatches, or dispatches, D-I-S-P-A-T-C-H-E-S, the form preferred by the Oxford English Dictionary, as opposed to dispatches, D-E-S-P-A-T-C-H-E-S. In weighty dispatches, often classified confidential or secret. Dispatches provided the official record of diplomatic activity and would eventually form part of the public record. They remained in widespread use in British diplomacy until the 1990s, and even today they have not entirely disappeared. Satow, in his Guide to Diplomatic Practice, written after his retirement, noted that dispatches should be in plain language, without attempt at wit. They could be given a wide distribution, including to the monarch. By the time Satow left Japan in 1900, most dispatches were typewritten, although in earlier years they had been laboriously copied out by hand. Once received within the Foreign Office, an elaborate procedure ensured that they received an appropriate distribution. See Zara Steiner, The Foreign Office and Foreign Policy, Cambridge University Press, 1969, pages 14 to 16. Today, the original Satow dispatches, covering the same period as this volume, are available in the National Archives. And for a complete picture, those records need to be consulted in addition to Satow's private papers. The correspondence in the present volume, although described as private letters, was more demi-official in the contemporary jargon. Normally, these letters were a parallel series to the dispatches or telegrams meant to provide some additional information or to express some relatively controversial opinion that Satow deemed not appropriate for the wide distribution of the official correspondence. These letters were not meant to become part of the formal record, though in practice, an occasional private letter or an extract from it might be copied into the official record or reproduced in the confidential print. After Satow's departure from the diplomatic service, this type of letter would become a much more common method of communication and increasingly part of the official archive until replaced in recent years by the all-consuming email. Those who have looked at the official correspondence or at Satow's diaries for the period will notice many familiar themes. Meetings noted in the diaries often produced a letter to London. Many of these linkages are highlighted in the notes accompanying the text of the letters. From Japan, there is much about the consequences of the 1894 to 95 Sino-Japanese War, growing Japanese self-confidence, and the lead up to the introduction of the revised treaties in 1899. The earlier part of the China letters are naturally dominated by the Boxer settlement, and later the growing tension between Japan and Russia becomes evident. Railway and missionary issues also frequently feature in the correspondence. Some of the acerbic comments on his diplomatic colleagues that are such a feature of his diaries can also be found in the letters. Some of the standard prejudices of the period are very much in evidence. There are a number of thinly disguised anti-Semitic comments directed at businessmen whom Satow did not like. In both Japan and China, questions relating to the consular service occasioned much correspondence. As a former consular official himself, Satow might have been sympathetic to his former colleagues' concerns and complaints, but he often expresses some exasperation at their ability to find extraordinary collections of mares' nests over consular commissions and like matters. The letters, like the diaries, reveal that he could be somewhat inconsistent in his judgments. As I noted in the introduction to his 1900 to 1903 diaries, Satow was godfather to one of William Kerr's children, and he seems to have been on good terms with Mrs. Kerr, but this did not stop him dismissing Kerr as only fit for work in a maritime port in 1900, rather than in the Chinese secretariat in the legation. Later, however, he refers to Kerr as an efficient officer, and by 1906 refers to him as a capable little man who takes trouble. It sounds as if he earned Satow's respect. Another theme from the diaries reflected in these letters is Satow's poor state of health. He was 57 when he took up the China appointment, and by that age, many of his consular contemporaries were either already retired or were seeking retirement on health grounds. Indeed, quite a number of his letters are taken up with the state of health of various consular officers and their wives. In Satow's own case, most of his service had been in what were deemed unhealthy posts, and he too might well have been ready to go by 1900. He certainly seems to have been by late 1905, when he wrote to Francis Campbell in the Foreign Office, F.A. Campbell, that his health cannot stand the Beijing summer any longer, and that the pleasures of earlier years, such as book buying, curio collecting, or gardening, were either no longer available or no longer appealed. Whether or not Satow was ready to leave the diplomatic service in 1906, he was certainly ready to leave China. J.E. Hoare, H.M. Diplomatic Service, 1969 to 2003. So anyway, I shall just mention one of the footnotes in more detail. When I read that the dispatches need to be consulted in addition to Satow's private papers, this is the footnote that accompanies that. Satow's original dispatches from Japan and China, that's 1895 to 1900 and 1900 to 1906, can be found in Foreign Office records, political and other departments, general correspondence before 1906 at FO 46, Japan, and FO 17, China. After 1906, the system of registering general correspondence changed. Most dispatches were also printed in the confidential print series, most of which is available in published versions. The drafts of Satow's dispatches from Japan and China can be found in FO 228, 228, and FO 262, 262. And that is the end of the introduction. Thank you very much for listening.